At some point, each widespread video game genre had to originate from somewhere. Some clever developers locked in what it means to play an adventure game or an RPG, and from then on, game after game had a golden standard to live up to and to expand upon. For first-person shooters, many of the core mechanics that we think of today began as little more than proof of concept in Wolfenstein 3D, but id Software really locked it in when they released Doom in 1993, cementing the speed, action, and structure of first-person shooters as we know them today. Doom has been remastered, re-released, and followed up by numerous sequels across far more consoles and personal computers than anyone could even reasonably keep track of. At this point, it's almost a gold standard for even minimally functioning computer processors. In fact, without Doom's success at release as an MS-DOS title, even Microsoft as we know them today may never have been involved in the gaming scene in quite the same way. At one point in history, Doom was actually estimated to be installed on so many more personal computers than Windows 95 that Bill Gates considered buying out id Software. And although that never came to fruition, Microsoft did include a copy of Doom with all purchases of Windows 95 for a time in order to push Windows computers as veritable hardware for gaming, obviously a move that has shaped much of the video game landscape that we know today. Let's pick apart this predecessor of shooters to see which aspects of this game have still stuck with the genre decades later as we figure out what's so great about Doom. While Doom may be the father of first-person shooters, let's take a look back at the grandfather, Wolfenstein 3D, to see which sorts of features and mechanics from id Software's earlier title were improved upon or otherwise renovated. Almost identically to Wolfenstein 3D's heads-up display, your ammunition types and amounts, as well as health and armor percentages, are listed along the bottom of the screen. It's a very clear display that keeps critical information available at all times, but also out of the way, in a time when graphics weren't complicated enough to allow for much overlaying or user interfaces that fade in and out as deemed necessary by whatever the player is doing at the time. This also adds a little characterization from an otherwise silent protagonist who will sneer when picking up a powerful new weapon and whose physical condition can be understood by quickly glancing at the bottom of the screen. The enemies are actually easier in Doom than in Wolfenstein 3D, at least on an individual basis. This is partly due to the addition of armor and balancing of weapon damage, but was also greatly impacted by the player's mobility and maneuverability. It's so much easier in Doom to sidestep incoming fireballs or move between cover with agility. Unlike Wolfenstein 3D, many of your weapons will have their own ammo type, so you won't waste your opportunity to use a secondary weapon to finish off an enemy if you happen to run out of rockets or energy cells in the middle of a fight. Each gun itself also has more unique features to impact the gameplay, such as the fact that the shotgun does actually spread, meaning you can damage enemies off to the side of your target as well. The game doesn't just adjust your aim to one target at a time and then decide damage by whichever gun you're using. In the same ballpark as this, the enemies can actually hurt each other as well. All the foes you mow your way through are actual entities in the world, and not just placeholders to show you where bullets come from. They can also interact with certain aspects of the game's environment, like opening doors and traveling through teleport paths just like the player. This game has a whole lot going for it, and defining a new genre isn't easy, but Doom also somehow gently guided its players through a whole new territory at the time of release by introducing the game's features at a pace convenient enough to facilitate player learning, but difficult enough to force the player to think outside the box in order to survive, until all the puzzle pieces have been displayed in obvious enough terms to make this nightmarish adventure more possible. The player is spawned into the first episode's first mission with nothing but a pistol and some brass knuckles. Beyond this, the player, controlling Doom Guy, will have to collect weapons, ammunition, armor, and a few other upgrades to increase their chances of survival, as they shoot and punch their way through level after level of zombified marines and hellish demons. Unless you're taking advantage of a secret route in that first level, and therefore have played before, all of your enemies will be a substantial distance from you whenever you first have a line of sight. That means no sudden attacks around corners or from behind you, so you can practice firing at these enemies before they notice you or get close enough to be very accurate. The enemies in these first few levels are limited to the zombified marines and the brown, spiky demons known as imps. The imps take slightly more damage to defeat, but they also telegraph their attack, so the player can navigate safely around their fireballs as you become accustomed to the different ways that enemies attack, and this fireball and similar energy blasts quickly become the standard attack for many demons you'll encounter in Doom's nightmarish adventure. One of the strongest standard demon types you'll come across, the Pinkies, are restricted to melee attacks, giving the player a chance to fight them off if they keep enough distance with a decently powerful gun. However, the Pinkies also have a home field advantage in the many labyrinths you'll confront them in, due to the tight turns that'll keep you boxed in. This game also took a page out of Castlevania's playbook, becoming much harder for those who can't survive and hang on to their earlier collectibles. Just because you restart from a checkpoint relatively close by doesn't mean as much for your benefit when you now have to take on your current adversaries with even fewer options than when you already died. If you're killed, you're taken back to the beginning of the level with a pistol and minimal ammo. You'll have to re-amass your arsenal all over again. The player can circumvent this setback by saving regularly upon reaching safe locations or after large conflicts. Another reason you may want to save is due to the fact that Doom has a notorious amount of traps for its player. Just as an example scenario, first you're baited into what seems to be a clear room with the prospect of success and progress, but then after grabbing that next key card or new weapon, you'll notice that you failed to realize that the room you were in was oddly empty and had a suspiciously generous amount of extra ammo in it. Then, as soon as you grab that new collectible, half of the walls in the room vanish to reveal a dozen new enemies. Players always have to check their corners and conserve ammo, when possible, to be ready to deal with any new and unexpected threats. There are passive traps and switches all over the game, causing chain reactions of events based on what you interact with and where you go. Opening certain doors or stepping into specific undisclosed areas may cause enemies to spawn, doors to open, or any other number of results to take place that keep the world feeling very reactionary, giving you feedback that you're headed in the right way, or maybe that you've just been lured into a trap. Luckily, you don't have to go unrewarded for your troubles, as many times more enemies means more treasures, at least in the more forgiving earlier levels. In fact, it's not uncommon to be met with health and armor bonuses at the end of a level. You're told upon completion of each stage what percentage of kills, items, and secrets you just collected. You're also told how long the level took to complete, and you're provided with a par time to challenge you, a feature that still remains an aspect of some modern first-person shooters like the games in the Halo series. Further sculpting the visual design of Wolfenstein 3D's first-person view, Doom added head bob and weapon sway. And while this would be heavily improved upon in first-person video games to come, this boat-like rise and fall of your character helped to liven up the scenario and increase immersion for the player. In terms of other now obvious additions to the engine used in Wolfenstein 3D would be textures on the floor and ceiling, more advanced lighting and shading, and the implementation of these features to create larger and more interesting environments than had ever been seen in a video game in the same speed, scale, or quality as what's demonstrated here. There's a great use of stark lighting design in the second level, in which darkness is used throughout a maze-like area with flickering lights in the distance, creating an eerie atmosphere where you're much more likely to be ambushed by demons as you practically feel your way around. Doom also expanded on the exploration of in-game height as an entire concept. There are no stairs or elevators in Wolfenstein 3D, everything is on a single vertical layer. Doom's world, in contrast, has extreme height and depths with more ledges and pits making up the world's infrastructure. Your aim is adjusted vertically as deemed necessary by the game, so you don't actually look up and down. Your bullet will just line up on that vertical axis on its own. This also means that if you can see an enemy, they can see you. There's not much in terms of discrepancy or stealth. The level design becomes complicated to an impressive degree in later episodes and stages, as the development team clearly became more talented in regards to creating interesting layouts. If you manage to pick up a map upgrade to reveal everything you haven't accessed, then you can really tell how packed with explorable areas each stage really is. One of Doom's core features, and possibly one of the most important to the overall experience of the game, would be the vast number of secrets. And Doom may have some of the most secretive secrets I've ever seen in a video game. They're incredibly difficult to track down all on your own, but do yield great rewards or other bonuses to your experience that make them worth the trouble. In the very first level of the first episode, there's a wide window out into a courtyard, in which you can see a glowing suit of armor. However, there's no obvious way to access this area. If a player hasn't realized there are secrets yet, they may begin to poke around after clearing the level of enemies in order to find a way to collect said armor. Whether they find it on their first attempt through the level or not, the player is now aware of secretly accessible areas of the map that offer exceptional rewards for anyone talented or thorough enough to figure out how to access these treasures. The fact that the end of each level is an interface you have to activate means the player can explore as freely as they'd like in search of secrets, ammunition, or whatever else they like before moving on. There's also some sort of blue-faced orb watching you from a couple spots in the game's first few levels. At first, this may seem like some weird sci-fi creature, but eventually you may find yourself collecting one and realizing that it's actually a supercharged power-up, pushing your health beyond the 100% limitation. Coming to this discovery later on causes the player to realize that many of these blue orbs they saw in earlier levels were actually hints to the existence of nearby secrets, in case a player wants to be a little more thorough the next time they try that level. Sometimes you'll think you've stumbled across a secret, when in reality you've just received a clue about the existence of a secret, such as a switch you can't find the door for or a window to some inaccessible area. Even if you find a switch, you still have to discover what it does on your own. Sometimes you'll find a keycard without realizing that a door of that color is even on this level. The more secrets you find around each level, the more complicated and difficult they'll become to either solve or survive, stacking new monsters, tight corridors, dark hallways, and any other threats the game sends your way, as it assumes anyone who has discovered these secrets must be a talented player who's in need of a higher degree of challenge. To open up a new resource to those with an eye for exploration, a computer area map upgrade can be easily collected on Episode 1, Mission 6, Central Processing, if the player notices and opens a false wall with a few helmets lined up in the shape of an arrow in front of it. This is possibly the most obvious hint to a secret in the entire game, and it leads the player to an upgrade to their auto map that shows an unexplored area in gray. This even includes secret areas such as false walls and the spaces behind them. If a player hasn't been paying too much attention to their end-of-level stats or the idea of where secrets may be, this obvious collectible blows open the doors on just how much is going on behind the scenes of these levels, and what sorts of areas you may be able to inspect in other levels to discover completely new areas in already beaten stages. These computer map upgrades are present throughout the game's many missions, but even if you don't manage to find one, if you keep a close eye on your minimap, you may notice some little things that don't quite line up, warranting further investigation and possibly revealing new secrets upon revisiting an area of the map. The soundtrack of Doom is easily one for the ages, sounding like a realistic DOS imitation of heavy metal. The composer and designers did a great job of using one of the most memorable and energetic pieces of the soundtrack in the first level. Even though it's nowhere near the most action-packed or tense the game will become later on, it still kicks the user's experience into gear straight out of the gate, setting the mood for a fun and fast experience unseen in the world of first-person shooters at the time, or really, video games at the time. The soundtrack mixes in slower and ambient tracks throughout the game in order to create suspenseful, dark, and uneasy atmospheres that break up the demon killing just a little bit to remind the player that they don't have to constantly hold the run and shoot buttons to experience everything this game has to offer. Some of the soundtrack's pieces also elicit feelings of desperation, loneliness, and fatigue, as Doom Guy struggles through level after level of zombified marines and demons of every shape and size. Doom is one of those games that I feel has aged unbelievably well over the years. This is most likely due to being produced not only by a team of talented individuals who honed their craft over several releases, but also in an era where 2D visual base design was nearly at its peak. This era of early 90s gaming, before the uncertain steps into the world of polygonal design, left us with such visually impressive classics as Super Metroid and Sonic the Hedgehog 3, and Doom managed to stretch and mold these 2D sprites and environments into a format that had never been seen in such an impressive construction. Even other great first-person shooters, such as Quake and Half-Life, may feel more outdated simply because they had to work in a more adolescent period of visual design, as the world of gaming learned how to polish the 3D models that would come to be the industry standard, especially in the first-person shooter genre. There are so many obvious reasons that Doom has been heralded as a classic, and while its fast-paced, dark atmosphere may not be for everyone, taking a look at what was going on around Doom's release in the world of gaming, it's undeniably clear what a huge step forward this was in gaming's history. The greatness that is the original Doom was a massive step forward in the world of action and horror games, shooters, as well as gaming on personal and home computers. The fact that this game means so much to the history of this beloved medium is only dwarfed by how enjoyable the game is, and remains to this day. That is what's so great about Doom. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of What's So Great About Gaming as we trudged through the darkest depths of Doom. Make sure to tell us what you think about Doom, or even suggest a game for another video. If you want to help in supporting the channel or maybe check out some bonus content, consider checking out our Discord, Twitch, or Patreon. Links to all of those are in the description. If you want to hear what's great about another game, check out the link to our last episode, Resident Evil, on screen or in the description. And please take the time to subscribe to be involved in the discussions here. Thanks again for watching. Now go play a great game. We'll see you next time.